Well, I feel honored that you're even interviewing me.
Well, I appreciate you coming out here. I'm stoked to have you.
Yeah, I'm glad
welcome.
to be here. Thanks.
You're one of my favorite photographers in Jacksonville. I first got introduced. I guess we should say how we met. We met at a Void photo gallery.
Yes.
Where we both were honored to have our pictures in their, was it their photo book? Is that what they call it?
Yes, I think it was their photo annual, and they had a show of some selected pieces from the annual.
Right.
In the show. They had kind of put them up on the wall. And
and we got to see it. Like, that was just such a cool experience, because I'd had a few pictures before put in their magazine, but it was an honor to be with you guys. And you had a great one. If anyone goes back and look at it, you had an awesome shot from up above of, I don't remember who it was, but he was lying on his surfboard and he had the boards laying around him.
Yes, Logan Gray.
Yeah.
Logan is a really good surfer that lives up in Mayport, and he has a large collection of 70s and 80s surfboards shaped by Florida shapers from that time period. And they're pretty rare now. They're hard to find. Yeah. And he's accumulated a pretty large collection.
In the colors, that was like the really cool part, because it's obvious it was lying down on the green grass, and then he has just a range of colors surrounding. It was like a rainbow of surfboards. It was a very cool visual to see from a different perspective than what you usually have.
Yeah, and that was a good example of kind of making do with what you have. Because originally I was going to shoot that with a drone. Because I wanted a straight overhead view of Logan, but the problem is that area, because it's so close to the Navy base, is restricted airspace.
Yeah.
So I couldn't fly it, and so I said, "What about the roof?" And Logan goes, "Yeah, I've got a ladder." So I climbed up on the roof, and it worked out pretty good. And then, of course, his dog running around really, I thought, made the shot, because the dog kind of ran around, and then for a second Logan grabbed him, and then he looked up at the camera for just a couple of moments, and I was able to get a frame in of the dog looking and Logan looking, and so that I thought that kind of that made it special.
It was it definitely added like a fun element to it that you couldn't have planned for. It would have been really hard to try to get a dog to line up correctly. They're very hard to take pictures of, but it worked out really well.
It did. Yeah. That was a fun shot. And he was very gracious to, give me the time to do that. It was something we had talked about, and I had kind of sketched it out. I keep a sketchbook of ideas. And so I had thought about that for a while. And then one day I called him and I said, "Hey, we should just give this a try and see if we can make it work." And
it did.
It did.
It was very cool. Mm-hmm. And I was scrolling through your Instagram some last night, just looking over some of the shots you've done, and it's interesting. You've traveled all around the world, and you've been to some really cool places to get amazing pictures. And some of my favorites, though, are the ones you get here in Atlantic Beach, when you just are able to catch it at just this beautiful light and the clouds and just the reflections of the water. And those are some of my favorite shots, because I think that with photography, sometimes people underestimate the value of your backyard.
Yes.
And they only think a good shot is somewhere where you have to fly 12 hours to get to, or drive across country or whatever and take a picture of something that's been taken a million times. But you have a very great ability in capturing moments in your backyard and then making them really just beautiful.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Wilson. I think sometimes what's right out your back door the subject matter can be incredible, but you have to look at it in a fresh way. I think sometimes we all kind of get caught in a formula, hey, I'm going to go out, I'm going to shoot this, and it looks kind of like what other people have done. And I'm always trying to kind of push myself and say, is there a point of view or a perspective that maybe people haven't seen before in Jacksonville or at the beach or whatever? And that doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it can be magical. And a lot of times it's the weather may come into play, or it may be, it may be the subject matter that you're shooting, or whatever, or the light is just very unusual. But we've got some, just in this area, we've got some incredible landscapes. Yeah, and a big variety of them very close to us.
We have a huge we have more variety, I think, than most people realize.
For sure.
Like just the fact that we have a huge downtown, we have very big river system, the Intercoastal, St. John's, all of that. But then we also have multiple beaches. We are access to Fernandina, Hannah Park, like all these places that, if you look at especially from an aerial perspective, which I know is something you like to do, you really can see the difference in like the topography and just the colors and the way it's shaped. It's awesome.
Yeah. And I think this part of Florida is still one of the least developed parts of the state. This and probably the Panhandle. Because if you look at the history of Florida, most of the early development was from, I'd say, Orlando south. Tampa was a town that was started in the late 1800s, as Miami was around 1900. And that's so if you study the history of Florida, unfortunately, those parts of the state have become, they're so developed that you don't have a lot of natural spaces like you have up here.
Totally.
So I feel in a lot of ways we're very lucky to have, one fact a lot of people don't know is we have one of the largest urban park systems in the United States in Duval County.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah,
much of the land here has been preserved through previous mayors, and so a lot of the land on like Cedar Point and all that it's all preserved land. And I work a lot with the Timucuan Parks Foundation to kind of feature some of these parks and preserves that are in our area. That's awesome. And they're very unique. They do have, there's a lot of interesting landscapes here, and you can drive half an hour out of town, and then you're in real wilderness. We were just up in Okefenokee Swamp last week. I'm shooting some work up there for a client, and that's just an incredible wilderness area. I mean, it's tens of thousands of acres of just, virgin swamp, and there's deer and alligators and all kinds of birds up there. And it's pretty much an hour and a half from Jacksonville.
Right.
So you can do it as a day trip.
Yeah.
So
you mentioned you do work with, Timucuan. You recently came out with a book, right?
Yes.
Photo book. I want to hear about that.
Yeah. So, one of the silver linings of the COVID, epidemic was the pandemic, was that we had a lot of free time on our hands, and because travel had been restricted, we decided to visit some places in Florida that I had been wanting to see for a long time, but just didn't, for whatever reason. We were traveling to other countries or whatever, but because we couldn't, we said, hey, we'll just do a trip in Florida. So my wife and I took a month, and we planned to visit some of Florida's really wild waterways. There are a few of them left, and they're scattered throughout the state. And we wanted to explore them on paddleboards, because paddleboards can kind of get into areas that are skinny. We call it skinny water, where you have to go way up into a creek or whatever. And they're just great for that. And plus, they're excellent platforms once you kind of get used to it for photography. So I was able to come up with I figured out a way to have 2 waterproof cases set up on my paddleboard, one in the front that had all my still cameras. Okay. And then the one in the back had my drone. So I was able to kind of launch the drone from the paddleboard. And so, you go into these places that are just completely off the grid, and then you take the drone up a few hundred feet, and you can really get a sense of perspective that you've probably never seen before in Florida. So
were these inflatable paddle boards? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And we had done some research, and there's a company here called iRocker Sup, which is actually based in Jacksonville.
Oh, cool.
And
shout out to them.
Yeah. And they manufacture these inflatable boards. They're not really for paddling, in the surf or whatever, but they're great for still water. They're light. They're very stable. And so we got an electric pump that you can use with your car battery, and decided we kind of plotted the entire route through using Google Maps. And we did a lot of research before we started our journey. And then we began in Weeki Wachee, which is it's on the Gulf Coast near
it's like a Crystal River, Ocala area.
Exactly. And that's a beautiful run. It's kind of in it's more developed there. But then from that point, we kind of went up we did 2 or 3 paddles on the Swanee River. We ended up in Cedar Key. Then we worked our way up to the St. Marks National Wildlife Refuge.
Wow.
Did a couple of beautiful paddles on the Wassissa River, which is a very remote river in the Panhandle. Ended up in the Panhandle near the Dune Lakes and did some paddles there. So in the end, we probably did 14 paddles over 30 days, and they were pretty much all day paddles. And then I would shoot photography, fly the drone, and then my wife kept a journal.
Okay.
And that ended up becoming a blog. And at the end of the trip, we decided that we would create a book about this, because not just a book, but a guide for people so that they could experience these places like we did. And because we had done all the planning and we had a lot of good detailed information about these places, it would make it a lot easier for someone else if they wanted to take a trip.
I think that is so cool, because I think there are so many places that are just not known about because the barrier to entry is kind of difficult. Like you said, like you had to do a lot of planning. You had the paddle boards, like, which is a specific like boat for that type of activity, and being able to share that through the use of your photography and the words written by your wife, I'm sure it's a very beneficial tool to have for people.
Yeah. And it actually, interestingly, I was posting the photos on Instagram, and iRocker Sup ended up partnering with me on a couple of projects because of that. And they're going to feature some of these on their website, a couple of these paddles that we did. And so that's been kind of fun. And then on July 15th, I'm going to give a talk along with Will Dickey about, it's going to have a little bit of at the Beaches Museum for the Timucuan Trail Parks Foundation about this journey and what we did and all that. So yeah,
that's awesome.
It's going to be fun. Yeah.
It's so amazing that nowadays, especially with social media and photography, that just through the use of creating quality content and tagging people, brands and such, like then they have the ability, and it's so easy for them to reach out to you, connect, and then create a partnership, and then from there be able to do cooler and cooler things. Like,
oh yes,
10 years ago, like you really couldn't do it like you could now, and that's just such a game changer to photography, I think. So
true. I mean, when I started in the marketing business, none of this existed. And so for me, it's just been a revolution, you might say, of how you get your name out there and how you promote yourself. I mean, it's really come now down to the individual. When I started, it was only big companies had that kind of power to flood the airwaves or television with messages. And now an individual can do that on these very incredible platforms. So
it's crazy.
Yeah.
And speaking of getting started, how did you get into photography? And when did you get into it?
It's kind of it's a long story. I always tell people I took a 30-year detour in marketing and advertising. But my first love was always photography. I studied it at the University of North Florida.
Oh yeah, that's where I am right now.
Yeah. With a teacher, Paul Carabinas, who is an excellent photographer who really specializes in alternative processes. And so that's actually where I met my wife, was in a photography class.
There you go.
And we learned all the traditional methods, black and white film processing, working in a dark room, burning and dodging with an enlarger. So I learned all the photographic process in that traditional way. And then we experimented with salt prints and pinhole cameras and that type of thing. So I had a real interest in photography. But when I got out of school, I quickly realized that it was going to be very difficult for me to, I had just gotten married. I was starting a family to make a living at that. So I ended up working in marketing and advertising for 30 years. And then about 5 years ago, I realized that I kind of wanted to have a change in direction in my life. I kind of felt I was coming to the end of something. And so I decided to just turn towards photography again. And at first it was very modest. I just had one camera and I started playing around with it. And what changed for me was starting to post some photos on Instagram.
Yeah.
And, it's just, I started posting some photos and people liked them. And then the feedback kind of got me more.
The instant feedback too.
Yeah.
It's very different than when how it used to be. Now you can immediately figure out if something is a hit or not, which is
correct.
Sometimes good, sometimes it's bad. But it is instant. It's funny.
Yeah. And so that kind of led me to, it gave me some confidence.
Right.
And I also joined an online community called, that was sponsored by National Geographic, called Nat Geo Your Shot. It no longer exists anymore, but it was a great online community where people from all over the world would post photos. And then sometimes if the photos were good enough, they would be actually used in assignment work for National Geographic. And they would post these requests. Hey, we're doing a story on mountains, or what's it like being in your home area?
Yeah.
And then people would post photos, and I actually had some success there. I started getting a couple of photos published in stories and stuff online, and that really kind of boosted my confidence. And the other thing that was great about that was the editors were always very clear and about what they liked and why they liked it. So when a photo got in, they would tell you the reason why. So I started learning about the idea of narrative in photography.
Right.
A photograph needs to tell a story, or composition, lighting, the importance of light, all of that. I started realizing, wow, this is just, it started opening all these new worlds for me. So that's kind of really built my confidence. And then about 2 years ago, I started really pursuing it full time. So that's what I've been doing for the last 2 years now.
Wow. It's so cool that you got to have those editors comment back to you, and just to have that level of expertise when you were getting back into it, to then just absorb all that knowledge. But why do they not have that anymore?
National Geographic has gone through a tremendous changes in the last 30 years, just like most other publications have. Excuse me. When I was growing up, it was, the circulation of that it was primarily the magazine that people subscribed to, and it was probably millions. I don't know. It was pretty much every household in America had National Geographic
on their coffee table.
Exactly. And then as time went on, television became more prominent, and then the magazine, the circulations just started declining. And I think now the only I think the only editions that are still printed are in other countries. I think the ones here in the United States are, I think they still do special editions and all that. So anyway, they started this this online community because of they wanted to source photography, but they didn't have the budget to hire hundreds of photographers for content.
Yeah.
So like a lot of other companies, I mean, you see this now in the stock photo world. I mean, there's sites now, like there's that one Unsplash that pretty much it's free photography.
Yeah.
I mean, so all of those changes really caused them to look at their model, figure out what they were going to do, how they could accommodate those changes. And then recently they were bought by Disney.
Right.
This was actually when your shot was still going on, and basically Disney just shut it all down. It was a money thing. They're
a business. And they're a business.
They're a business. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a bummer that something like that doesn't exist anymore, because that is such a great thing for young photographers. I mean, anyone, and just people getting into it. And it is kind of sad to see that print's not dead, because there are still people that do print, but it is not what it used to be. And I know that I have a much more rewarding feeling if I get a picture printed in a magazine than up on a website. There's just something really cool about like opening something up and being like, wow, that is someone used my picture, paid money to have it printed, and I'm holding it right now. It's the coolest thing in the world, I think.
It is. No, it's very true. And I think it's kind of where the rubber meets the road. When you see something printed, or you frame a print, it's still it's something tangible then. It's real.
Right. You can hold it. You can feel it. It's no longer just a megapixel on a phone or on a computer. It's like, it's right there, and like it's now visual, and people can come and see it and hold it themselves, and it's pretty magical. Yeah, and I think for every trend, there's always a counter trend, and I think we're kind of there's the proliferation of images now is just so incredible that we're just inundated with massive amounts of data and imagery every day. And I think people are beginning to the counter trend now is, I want to see something that's tangible, that's real. So this idea of a book or an actual print or a magazine is something that think people are kind of gravitating towards. I totally agree with that. And I think that with so much change going on in the world, and there's a lot of issues here and there, whatever, I think there's a human desire for the past sometimes, and to have nostalgic things. And something that is nostalgic is a printed magazine or a photo book, because that's something that happened that they could do longer times ago, and they still could do it now, but it kind of brings it back down. And that's like a difference between like reading a book on your phone versus reading it like a hard copy. You don't have the distractions, like it's just this, like it's just this book, and there's nothing else. So I totally do think that it will come back in a way, not in the same way it did, but in the sense that people are going to search for that nostalgic feeling. Yes. Yeah. And I think that this whole interest in film photography is part of that, counter trend, that film, there's something real about it. It's not a digital form. It's an analog form of photography. And I have a Hasselblad camera that I've been using, and I love it because it kind of brings, all the memories of when I first started getting into photography kind of come back to me. And because everything is manual, it's a lot more, you feel more connected when you're shooting something. Right. You're not, I love digital, and it's amazing what you can do with digital cameras, and the lenses today are just, they're so sharp and perfect, but there's something about film that is just
it can be so good if it's processed correctly and printed correctly. It just has a beautiful look to it.
Well, and I think it slows the process down, and
yes,
it forces you to really know your stuff. Because if you don't know, like with a digital camera, you can get away with not really knowing what you're doing for simpler images, but with film, if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to ruin the shots, and you also have a limited number of shots.
Yes.
So you have a limited number of chances to get this picture, whereas I can turn on my camera and I could take 4,000 pictures of an event, and one of them's going to be all right. You know, like it's not hard, but that is a big difference, and it's interesting to switch back and forth and to use both. And I think using a film camera benefits your digital photography because you can take those principles that you have from the film camera and push it towards your digital.
I think that what you said is very true, that when you slow down, you observe more.
Yeah, you have to take it in.
Yes.
Because every shot is precious. So you have to make the most of, how many, is it 24 shots?
It depends. Like if it's a 35 millimeter, it could be 24. If it's a medium format, it's usually 12.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, even less. I mean, you really have to be aware of what's going on in your environment.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, but it's fun. It's so different. In fact, in the book, I shot some images with the Hasselblad using a infrared filter on the camera. And what's cool about infrared is that it cuts down 95% of the light that comes through the lens.
Wow.
But it's picking up this infrared spectrum. And so everything has this kind of surreal look to it, because what is green becomes white.
Oh, that's interesting.
What is blue becomes very dark. And so you get this, I love it for nature photography, because you look at these, the landscapes in a totally different way. And so I'd run around and set up my camera on a tripod, because you're taking these very long exposures, like 25, 30 seconds.
The long exposures, those are some of my favorite images. I think they are so cool. I mean, and you've got them nailed. You do a lot of, I mean, being here in Florida, we have access to waves, obviously, and you do a lot of those, and I love them. I mean, it's like a painting, but you took it with a camera, and it's just so cool to be able to see.
Yeah,
those.
it's I love camera movement and the idea of slowing time down. And it gets back to when I was working with Mr. Carabinus doing alternative processes, because pinhole cameras are like that. A pinhole camera is extremely simple. It's just you take, it's a black box that's light proof.
Right.
And you take a piece of tin or copper and a needle, and you just put a very, very tiny hole in the piece of metal, and that's your lens.
That's so crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically how all photography works. I mean, you have a piece of film on the back of the box, and then what you do is you just have a piece of tape, and then you pull the tape up and you let the light come through that little pinhole for a period of time. And so we would do these long exposures for, sometimes a minute, 2 minutes, but you'd get these really interesting effects because you're letting all the light is coming in, and you're slowing time down. So I think my interest in camera movement and all that goes all the way back to when I first started playing around with those pinhole cameras.
Yeah, I love doing the motion blurs. When I got into surf photography, if I was shooting from the land, I don't have a super long telephoto lens. So I always was thinking, what can I do to make this shot more interesting? And then I found out how to actually do a motion blur with action and somewhat keeping the surfer in focus and having everything be a blur, so it just looks like he's flying through space. And I think those are some of the coolest things. Yeah.
And I started, I study a lot of, I have my photo heroes, and one of them is, I can't remember his name now. It's, oh gosh, Ernst Haas, Haas. And he was one of the earliest photographers to really embrace color photography.
Huh.
And if you ever get a chance, check out his work.
Okay.
He's influenced my work a lot, but he did a lot of motion camera movement type work, and was always very interested in nature, and landscape photography. And he was very popular, very in the 60s and early 70s.
Okay.
And so sometimes I'll kind of go back and I'll look at his work because I find it very inspiring.
And would you consider yourself a landscape photographer? Is that your favorite?
I think for me, yes. It's kind of where I think I have a lot of skills as far as being able to kind of look at a scene and try to figure out what's interesting about it. Mm-hmm. But I have been getting more into macro photography.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, I have noticed some of that.
Yeah, and I like that because it's kind of, you're seeing these little worlds that they're all around you, but you'd never notice them.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you look, like when I was in the Okefenokee last week, I ended up shooting some small, lizards and things like that on plants and stuff. And it's just, if you can get close enough, it's just incredible the subject matter, and it's right there in front of you that you don't even realize it until you really start again observing and looking.
Yeah, it is so weird to think about when we're walking around. We have all these little civilizations and worlds that live around us, and we're not even aware of it. And then macro photography really allows you to hone in on that and just focus. It's really, really cool to see. Yeah,
it's fun. It's a different, you can do it with a telephoto lens. You don't have to have a macro lens, but I do have a macro that if I have the time, I'll pull one out, and it focuses what they call to a 1-to-1 ratio. So you can get extremely close to a subject.
Is it like 100 millimeter or something?
It's an 85 millimeter, but you can literally get the lens within an inch of something.
Nuts.
Yeah.
For people who don't know a lot about lenses, that is very close. That is not normal.
That's right.
You have to have a very specific lens for that. Mm-hmm. But so out of all I'm always curious, and I always ask this to people who've traveled a lot, and you've definitely traveled all over. Do you have a favorite place that you've ever gone to that has been like your favorite destination? And then on the other side of that question is, what's your bucket list location?
Good question. I would say Indonesia has probably been the most interesting place I've ever been. And it's not just the fact that there are these, all this series of islands,
right?
In this, I guess it would be in the Southeast Pacific. Anyway, it's just a totally different culture than ours. We spent a month on the island of Bali and then ended up going to Lombok, which is near Bali. One is Hindu, the other is Muslim. Lombok is much more undeveloped, but spectacular scenery and a very interesting culture on both of those islands. I'd like to go back someday and explore some of the other ones, but I just was fascinated by how people live there. They live very differently than we do.
They live very simply, right?
They live very simply, and they are also very spiritual. Especially in Bali, the Hindu culture there, religion is very front and center in their lives. So if let's say you get up in the morning, you'll see a woman burning offerings on a little temple right outside of the house and she's praying for a good day or for whatever it may be. So they're very spiritual people, and religion is very important in their lives.
So it's not like here where you just go to church on Sunday. you're like one day of the week go to church. Like there, it's like an everyday type of thing.
Yes, and they have. If you studied Hindu, especially the Hinduism that's practiced in Bali, they have all these different gods. And so each god has its own importance. One might be for, you might pray to a god for success in business, or you might pray to a god to heal a relative or whatever. But these, they have these religious festivals that go on literally almost every day of the year. So you'll see people gathering for a festival.
Wow.
Or they don't really pray in churches. They're just praying outside.
That's so interesting.
In the environment. Yeah.
Very different.
Very different than here. Yes. Wow. And I'll never forget talking to we went there. This was a couple of years after the Bali bombing. I don't know if you remember that, but there was a terrorist bombing there. And I was talking to the Balinese people about what had happened and all that. And they, instead of treating it as if we're going to find out who these people were and seek revenge, they were looking at themselves and saying, why did it happen to us? What have we done to create an atmosphere where terrorists would do something like this?
Oh my gosh, that is completely different.
So it all gets back to karma. Like, did we create a karma that made other people feel, come up with a reason for violence? So that just gives you a sense of how differently they approach things than we do.
That's crazy. I mean, that is complete opposite.
Yeah.
To how we do.
In America, we raise an army, we attack the enemy, and I'm not saying that. I mean, we did that for very good reasons, right. But over there, it's just the way they approach things is very different than us.
Now, when you go and you experience that, and you said you were there for a month, so you're pretty within the culture. You're not just there for a weekend.
Right.
Does that change your perspective on life, like when you come back to the United States?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think travel is one of the best ways for you to... travel just, I think it makes you a more complete and balanced person, because you begin to identify with other cultures and how they live and how the world works beyond the world that you live in right here in Jacksonville, right, and in this area. So I think and also you observe things in a different way. And so I think it helps the way you see things, the way you photograph, the way you in general, just approach life. I think it's very important for people to travel. For me, it's something that I have to do because it's kind of like a reset for me.
Oh, okay.
It just like when I go surfing, and you're out in the water, you're in this environment that you're not normally in. And so you're picking up, the sound of the waves and the birds flying and all that. So it's like a reset, and I think travel is very similar to that.
Yeah, I think it's healthy to leave the bubble. Mm-hmm. We all have our own bubbles, whether it's the city we live in, the state we live in, our neighborhood, whatever it is, and you get tied up in it, and then your whole thought process is based on what's going on in that bubble.
Yes.
But there's a global bubble, and there's a lot of other opinions, a lot of other perspectives, and you don't have to agree with all of them. You don't have to practice all of them, but to know that they're there and to see them and witness them and understand them, I think can completely change how you view your own world.
Yes, and the fact that you're meeting other people. When we travel, my wife and I always try to really engage people and talk to them and figure out how they live and what's important to them.
Right.
And I'll give you just another interesting story. I was talking to this guy when we were in Bali, who he was the head of the household. In Bali, the entire family, including the grandparents, the whole family lives together in a single kind of complex.
Huh.
Yeah. So
that's normal?
That's normal. Yeah. Okay. So you'd have the grandparents living in they're almost like a Balinese house is almost like has pods. So the grandparents will live in one pod, and then the family will live in another. And so I said, well, how do you get along?
Yeah.
I mean, what happens when you have an argument? He says, well, in our home, we have a special room where we all go and we work out our differences in this room. And it's a place where no one is judged. Everyone is listened to. And he said, that's how we solve our family differences.
Just open communication. No.
And I'm thinking, wow, it's so, wow, boom. I mean,
it's so simple, but no one does that. Here. I mean, it's very, you keep it to yourself, you push it down, and then one day it explodes.
And I thought to myself, man, that makes it's really smart. You know, you don't have, and you find that the people there are happy. You know, they may have very little in terms of wealth or things or whatever, but inside they're happy and they're fulfilled and they're living a very rich life.
Yeah. Do you think that someone who lives like in the United States, let's say here, for example, do you think someone could move there, adapt that lifestyle, and then become as happy as they are? Or do you think it's something you have to be born into?
I think a lot of I think if the idea of happiness means different things to different people.
Right.
But I think it's internal. I think if you live a life of gratitude and thankfulness for the things that you have been, the gifts you've been given, then you're a happy person. If you're always looking at, what is that, the glass half full or whatever. I think a lot of it is how you approach life in general.
Right. And they are probably a very grateful group of people.
Well, their religion stresses that.
Oh, okay.
Hinduism is all about karma and making sure that you treat people as you would want to be treated. So another interesting story is if you went into a supermarket in Bali and let's say you put something in a shopping cart and you didn't pay for it, you may have forgotten about that. Let's say you put it in there and for some reason you didn't pay for it and you walk out of the store, you will go back to the store to pay for that item because it is considered bad karma to consciously know that you took the item without paying for it. So the bad karma can lead to other bad things.
Right.
So again, a very different kind of philosophy about how you live your life.
Is there less crime there because of that?
Yes, I'd say in general there is. I would say violent crime is extremely rare there.
Really?
Yeah. Murders just don't happen there. There may be theft and stuff like that, but murders there are pretty rare.
Because if they're all believing and living the life of thinking about karma, if you were to murder someone, it's pretty bad karma.
It's going to come back on you, and not only on you, on your family and the descendants of your family.
Oh, so it keeps going generationally. Okay.
Yes. It's very different than here.
Yeah. I wonder. It would be interesting to see if those principles, especially the living together, if it were brought over here more and people tried it, how it would go. I don't know if it would go well. Yeah,
I mean, United States has a lot of great qualities.
Yeah.
But I think, as I said before, travel can open your mind up to other ways of living and experiencing the world.
Right.
So I'm not saying that what their way is better than ours. It's just different.
Right. And it works for them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's other cultures that have different ways. And
and I think it gets back to like what I was saying is if you live a life that you're thankful for the things you have. Some of that I learned from talking to the people over there. Before that, I just looked at things differently. And so it was a very good experience for me personally.
Well, it was probably, I think, going to places like that where it's not is it considered impoverished there?
No, I would say in general, their culture is fairly well developed.
Okay.
And people you don't see poverty there. There is some, like here.
Yeah.
But most people are pretty industrious. They're very good craftsmen. They have a wonderful talent for creating things.
Oh, okay. So are they very artistic?
Extremely artistic. Like you'll go out into the outside of the cities, there's all these places where they almost have these guilds. I don't know if you know what a guild is, but it's where you have the idea of craftsmanship. You have an apprentice, then you have the master craftsman, right. And then so they all learn from each other, and they kind of over the years and they're very proud of what they do.
That's very cool. Mm-hmm. But it's a more modest way of living, though, I'm sure.
Very modest. Yeah, you don't see most of the bigger buildings and things are catered to tourists. Tourism there is very big, and it's important to their economy. But once you get outside of the cities, it's agrarian. It's kind of rural. It's rice farming. Small places where people live off of the land.
It's so crazy to think about, like when you think about like a city like New York or something that's a very industrial, and then you think about there's other places in the world like there's rice paddies and people are working the rice paddies and they're making it's just the polar opposites, and it's in the same time period. It's crazy that they've continued to. It's really amazing.
Yeah, and I think it makes you realize is that they live more in harmony with the land. So, there's so many things about Bali that I found interesting. Instead of using insecticides to solve, let's say, a problem with something is eating the rice, they'll use an animal. Like you'll see ducks everywhere in the rice paddies, and the reason they have ducks in the rice paddies is because they're eating all these insects that could eat the rice.
Wow, that is really cool.
Yeah, and it's simple. I mean, you'd see them marked with paint, like they would be that farmer's ducks, and it's like they're pest control.
That is so cool.
Yeah,
and the ducks get fed, and then it's just the circle of life. Yeah,
exactly. So really smart that they try to live in harmony with nature and all that.
It's very evolved.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, so then that being your probably favorite place you've gone to, what is like bucket list location?
No, I would say the bucket list would be Bhutan.
Where's that?
That is in Central Asia.
Okay.
It's a very unique country that it borders Tibet, India, and China.
Huh.
And they also have a very interesting culture there. Tourism is extremely limited because they don't want to overdevelop the country. It's kind of in the foothills of the Himalayas. So they have, their religion is Buddhism.
Okay.
And so you'll see these beautiful, incredible temples up on hillsides and things like that. And so when you travel to Bhutan, I've actually been doing some research on it. You have to be accompanied by you have to go with a guide, or you have to go with a tour group. But whatever you do, there's a limited amount of people from outside of the country that can come in there.
Okay.
And because of that, and because of the fact that they have a very interesting culture, I want to go there.
I think the fact that, like you just said, it's limited is probably what makes it such a special place.
Yes.
Because it doesn't get overrun. Like I just went to Hawaii for the first time, and you were there.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you were there a week before me, I think.
Yeah. And by the way, I loved your shots. You had some great photos.
Thank you.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about where you went.
Yeah.
Too.
But so I had never been there before, and I mean, only what I knew about was from watching Magnum PI as a kid.
Yeah.
Which most people, when I say that, they think about the new one. I'm like, no, not the new one. I'm talking about the original one with Tom Selleck. But I was really interested to see how much tourism defines those islands. I mean, without it, it's crazy. And I had heard about localism there and it being an issue in some places, and I get why. I mean, like I get why they wouldn't want it to be too overrun and over developed, because it changes the way that the island functions and the landscape and the nature and the resources, because everything's limited because it is an island. But it was really cool to still see a place that has their culture still rooted there and continue.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you go to the Big Island?
So we were on Oahu for a week, and then we went to the Big Island for a week, and those are just completely different places.
Yes.
That was so crazy to see something that is really not that far away from each other. It's in the same ocean. They're both islands, but they're completely different landscapes.
Yes.
I mean, one's a desert in some spots, and then one has like the rainforest kind. It's just crazy.
Yeah. Well, we went to the Big Island because there are that has the best examples of the early temple complexes.
Huh.
So there are two there that are pretty large. They're the biggest in Hawaii. And because at one time when King Kamehameha he basically united all of the different islands. Before that, they had all these different kings and everything.
Right.
And so he built two very large temples there, and that was kind of the capital before Westerners arrived.
Okay.
Yeah. So Betsy and I found that very interesting, and we talked to a lot of people that were native Hawaiians, and they believe that there's a spiritual side to the land that's front and center, just like what I was telling you about in Bali. And a good example of that is, of course, you know that the Big Island has a lot of volcanic activity.
Yeah.
And in the past, many times homes have been lost because of eruptions and magma and all that kind of stuff and lava flows. But when you talk to a Hawaiian about why that happens, he said, well, it's Pele. If Pele wants to take the land, there's nothing we can do about it. It's her land. So again, very different than, if a hurricane comes, we don't say, well, nature is always in control, but over there, they have a much different relationship with nature and they look at it in a different way.
Yeah, that is interesting. And when we went to the volcano, and it became dormant 2 days before we got there.
Okay.
So there was like no activity, and I'd never seen an active volcano. So they're like, yeah, it's dormant. I'm like, oh, okay. We walk up and just nothing. I'm like, all right. I was like, really? But it was crazy to see like a crater. I've been to the Grand Canyon, and it kind of reminded me of that in the sense that just like everything's flat, and then all of a sudden, boom, just like a crater, just a huge crack in the earth. And it's crazy to see that. Yeah.
And you also realize that over there, the land, it's geologically, it's very young.
It is. It's the youngest island.
Yeah. It is. Yeah. And at some point, millions of years from now, the Big Island will be a shallow reef, and there will be other islands in front of it that are rising. And if you look, we were stayed in pretty much in Airbnbs and that type of thing. And one of them, they had an atlas of the Hawaiian Islands. And so there was a lot of really good information about the geology of the islands. And literally, it's a chain of islands. There's probably 30 of them, but most of them are underwater.
Oh my
because
gosh.
Millions of years ago, they were up above, they were above, and had land, and now they've sunk down.
Oh my goodness.
So, and that will just
weird.
continue on.
It's so crazy to think about.
Yeah.
How it's just like, it's like a machine that's just like, just fluctuating. And it's a beautiful place though.
What was your favorite part of the islands, or what kind of fascinated you about it?
On the second day we were there on Oahu, we did a kayak tour where we kayaked to, this was on the North Shore, and we kayaked to, there are these two little islands that are out there. I don't remember the names of them, of course, but we did this kayak, and it was just so cool to be, I love kayaking, and it was so amazing to be able to have such clear water, and then just kayak to this island where this magma was, and we saw a monk seal, and just hiking around this little island. And that to me felt very pure to be able to just hop on a kayak and then just take it up in the open ocean, passing other little islands, seeing the island from the water, and just get on this island, and just to be able to be there and on the small little structure just hanging out. Like,
yeah,
I thought that was such a neat, like, crazy thing that you can kayak many places, but I've never been able to do that type of thing where I can kayak to a little island in the tropic. It was beautiful.
Yeah, and that's a good word, pure. I think there are places that are still like that in Hawaii, but you have to really look for them.
Right.
You're not going to find it if you go to the, Mauna Kea resort and,
right,
to some hotel and sit by a pool all day and check out the beach. You have to really look for those places, but they're there.
Yeah. And so that was one of the coolest things we did. And then we also did a hike called Willy Willy Nui. It was on Oahu, and it was this hike that there was only 3 other people on. It started in a gated residential neighborhood, so you had to get a ticket to come in, and there were only 7 parking spots for it or something. And it was this really, really awesome ridge hike that you then had a 360-degree view of the whole island. Wow. Amazing. And
fantastic.
That was crazy because I don't think I'd ever done a ridge hike like that. And I am a little scared of heights. I'm going to prep. So I do get a little nervous. I've been skydiving twice, and I enjoy that, but something about climbing on the side of a mountain is a little different. I don't know. It's just, it was getting windy, and I'm looking over. Oh, that's a ledge on the left. That's a ledge on the right. If I fall, I better go forwards or backwards. But that was a really cool experience because it wasn't crowded. Yeah. And I think that was the big thing, because the day before we did the Cocoa Crater, hiking to the classic stairs going up, and it's cool. It's definitely something you need to do. It's hard. It's a good little workout, but so many people on it. It's just, you really feel like you're a tourist and you're in a city when you're doing that, because you're just surrounded by other people. The views are beautiful though, going on that. It's a cool experience, but I think the best part about the Willy Willy Nui, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, hike was the fact that there wasn't really anyone else on it. And the only one of the other people was a local guy, and he told us other tips about the islands and stuff. So that was always, it's always fun to meet a local person. Yes. And they gave you insider scoop on stuff. So anytime we could find some place that wasn't a tourist hotspot was really fun.
Yeah. And we had a similar experience to that. Several on the Big Island, but one of our favorites was, and again, we do a lot of research before we travel. Yeah. So when I was telling you about these temple complexes, there is a spot on this would be on the leeward side of the Big Island. And this area at one time had been a very big spot where the original Polynesians lived. And probably 1,000 years ago, there was a lot of travel between the islands. Right. They would travel back and forth, and sometimes they would travel to Polynesia. Wow. And if you're interested in the story behind that, it's fascinating because they migrated from the islands further south at least 1,000 miles, and they really had no navigational instruments. It was all done with being very observant of winds, currents, right? Using the stars, to basically we're going to navigate north, and then eventually they found these islands. But they would go back and forth once they did find them.
Which is nuts.
Yeah, so there's a place there that it's a series. You see it up on a hill, and there's a series of vertical stones that are set amongst all these other stones. The stones themselves are maybe 6-7 feet high, but since then, they never really realized why they were there.
Yeah.
But they found out later, once they did a scientific study, that these are navigation beacons.
Oh.
So they represent almost like points on a compass. So this stone would point you in the direction of, let's say, Maui. This one would point you in the direction of Kauai. This one would point you in the direction of Polynesia. And so
Wow.
if you were sailing or whatever, you would kind of use these as waypoints to start your journey.
That
And
is
so
cool.
we went up there. It was kind of one of the last nights we were there. We kind of walked up to this place and we watched the full moon rising behind these stones. And it was just a very spiritual moment for Betsy and I, just to know that thousands of years ago, people probably stood in this very spot and were trying to figure out where they were going to go and what journeys they were going on. So
that is surreal.
Yeah, really interesting. And again, hard, not an easy place to find, but if you really put the time in, you can find these little kind of magical places like that.
Yeah, that is, and it's crazy that,
and there was no one there.
Yeah.
The entire, I mean, it was just us.
Which is, crazy because it's an island. It's not, I mean, it's big, but it's not that big. So you would figure that everything would be discovered and populated and normal to see other tourists there. But then you get to these places and you're like, there's 2 other people here. Like, this is crazy. Like, I feel like there's not a ton of places like that on the mainland that you can go to, you know, like, unless you're like off-roading, like in Utah or Wyoming, and you're like out there in the desert or something. But
well, there's even some places like that in Florida.
There's
if you really, the wild places are still there. In fact, when we were in this, if you've never been to St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge, it's incredible. It's hundreds of thousands of acres of just wilderness. And you'll see it on, if you look at a map of Florida, it's this big, giant, place where there's nothing. And once you get there and you drive into there's one road in and one road out. But if you want to see what Florida looked like before, the Spaniards came and all that, check that place out, because it's pretty amazing. It's all been preserved. There's a lot of wildlife, and the bird life there's tons, thousands and thousands of birds there.
Oh, that's awesome. Dang, that is cool.
So yeah, those places are still around, but you just have to kind of look for them.
Yeah, it's the looking that I think a lot of people don't like. It's not as fun to do that part,
Yeah. Well, I think we all, we get into kind of a groove where we say, hey, I'm going to, what's easy and what can I go to? I don't have a lot of time.
Right.
And that's one thing that I think has been a real gift for my wife and I, is we do now have the luxury of time to kind of go to some of these places and really explore them in a, deeply is the word.
Yeah.
Not just kind of check it out for a day, but hey, we're going to spend a week here.
Quality time.
Yes.
Versus just
a deep dive.
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely something that would be really beneficial.
And it's hard. I think when you're younger and you're pursuing your career and all that, it's hard to find the time to do that.
It is. This is something I was talking about with my parents the other night, because we bought a old Airstream and we're finishing. They're gonna sell it. So if anyone's interested in buying an old Airstream, let me know. It's a 21 footer. We have completely redone it to the point where it's we had to restrip it, remake it. It's like a fully shell now, so it could be used for anything. Like someone could make a pop-up shop out of it. They could use it as a camper. They could use it as a studio or whatever. But the thing we were talking about was, we don't have as much, like, I don't have as much time to go and do things that I would like to do as like you think about that you think you would, like in hindsight. And that is sometimes it is hard to find those moments where you can go and do something and have it be like a quality experience.
Take the time. My advice to you is, looking back, my wife and I, when I was in my 20s, we had just started this business and we were building this marketing business, but we really wanted to take the time on our honeymoon to explore somewhere. And so we took a month off in my 20s.
Wow.
And, and luckily I had the guy I worked with was very, he understood what we were doing and why we wanted to do it. And we spent a month in New Zealand.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
And it just kind of, from that moment on, after that trip, I started realizing, wow, this, I love what I'm doing as far as my career is concerned, but this is going to give my life balance. And so we've kind of started to pursue that. We've kind of kept that going throughout my whole life.
That's awesome. That's a month. That's cool. New Zealand.
Yeah. When you have a month, you have a lot of time to really explore a place.
Well, and also I feel like when you have a lot of time, you don't feel the pressure to rush.
Yeah.
Like you can slow down and enjoy the little things more.
Yeah.
Which I feel like most times when you go on vacation, you go for a week, it's like you got to do boom, 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 boom every single day. Like you got to just hit it and go. And then that's hard sometimes. It definitely changes the experience.
Yeah. But even what we'll do sometimes is we'll take an afternoon and we'll go to Spanish Pond, which is a great little park. I don't know if you've ever been to that. It's part of the Tomuquin. It's part of what's the Fort Caroline National Monument.
Oh, okay.
On the other side there is an incredible area called Spanish Pond or Round Marsh, and it's 15 minutes from here.
Oh.
And in the wintertime, you can walk the entire afternoon and maybe see 4 people.
Oh my gosh.
Beautiful spot, 15 minutes from Atlantic Beach.
Okay.
Check it out sometime.
All right.
So what I'm saying is you don't have to travel far.
Right.
You can have that quality time even around here.
Well, and that goes back to what we were saying about just photographing in your backyard.
Yeah.
You can still find things to photograph, and you can make them interesting through your skills as a photographer and like how you compose something.
Yeah. And I think even going to that place, we've been there many times, but you get to know it and you start seeing things that you never saw before the more you visit it.
You notice, yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes if you go back to a place over and over again, you really, again, you kind of, you dive into it deeply and you really get a feel for the place. There's a lot of interesting history about that place too.
Yeah.
There was a guy named Willie Brown that who lived on this land. It's probably several hundred acres. His entire life, he was a Florida cracker, lived a very simple life in a cabin, no electricity, no running water. And in the 1970s, he could have sold that land for millions of dollars because developers wanted it.
Yeah.
But instead, he donated the land to the National Park Service.
Oh, wow.
So because of Willie Brown, we have this gym that's just a few minutes from the beaches where you and I can go and see a piece of Duval County that probably has not changed in thousands of years.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That is so.
But Willie Brown was the guy. He was a visionary. Think about it. He could have sold the land and been, but he, I thought to myself, wow. He has all these wonderful quotes about, if you Google him, he was an interesting man. But, I think he realized it was more important to preserve it rather than just develop it.
Yeah.
So.
That's crazy. That's very cool. He did that though. Well, one last thing I wanted to ask you about is what do you think of this like new wave of phone photography, and how do you think it's changing like photography and how photographers operate?
I think it's awesome.
You do?
Yeah. Again, I look through things with through a historical lens.
Okay.
If you go back into the history of photography, a camera named the Kodak Brownie changed photography. Brownies were cheap cameras that pretty much anybody could buy for, they were a couple of dollars or whatever. And so it kind of took photography from this idea of it being only a few people had, these big giant view cameras with big plates. And with a Brownie, anybody could shoot photographs. And I think we're kind of seeing that again,
right,
with using phone cameras. I think it's good, and there's good and bad about it. I think as a creative tool, they're getting better every year with every update. In fact, I would say 30% of the time I'm using a phone to shoot certain things now, on a shoot or whatever. The bad part is the proliferation of imagery is just, I think the issue I see is that just because your phone camera can shoot 1,000 pictures, you shouldn't be putting 1,000 pictures on your Instagram page.
Yeah, totally.
So the bad part is we're inundated with so many images that it's kind of hard just to wade through all the stuff you see every day.
Yeah.
So what I say is quality over quantity.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that the Nat Geo editors taught me was be ruthless in your editing.
Mm-hmm.
If you shoot 1,000, what they always told me was for an assignment, the photography would submit 4,000 photos and they would end up picking 4.
Yeah.
So be your own editor. Be ruthless in looking at your own work and saying I'm only going to publish the best.
Yeah. And when I was first starting out, I would take pictures of people and I would send them 300 pictures.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, oh my God, this is a lot. And I realized I should not do that anymore. And it is true. Quality definitely over quantity.
And I think that transfers into your phone is like, even though you can shoot a ton of photos with it, if you're going to shoot to shoot a good photo, I always say the rule is you're going to maybe get 1 or 2 good shots on a shoot.
Right.
Maybe 1 or 2 or 3 if you're lucky.
Yeah.
But those are the ones that you should be publishing, not everything that's on your phone.
Yeah. It is pretty funny that, because it's so easy to take a picture with a phone. You just pull it out. And Chris Burkard has I don't know if it was him, but he always says this quote. And he says the best camera is the one you have with you. That is something you always have with you. And it is cool that it's bringing people into the photography world that maybe wouldn't be, because they're realizing they do enjoy taking pictures, and it does take a good picture. So then it has them wanting to get a real camera, just like it builds. But that is very true.
Well,
that you said.
And here's a great example of that. When we were in Hawaii, we were hiking in this lava tube,
mm-hmm.
which is basically a cave where the lava, flowed through underground. Well, I had my little, Sony camera. I'm trying to set that damn thing up in a cave and and it was just, I pulled out my phone, and the iPhone has this new night photo mode.
It's awesome.
I'm going, oh my God, this is so good. Yeah. And, I started shooting pictures, and what it'll do is it goes for maybe 2 or 3 seconds. And if you hold it really steady, it's kind of, I guess, taking hundreds of pictures and putting them together. I don't know exactly how it works.
Yeah.
But I was amazed at the quality of the shots I was getting.
Yeah. So
there's a great example of, hey, phones they're becoming serious photography tools.
Yeah.
In the right situation, they are better than I think a DSLR.
I agree. And I think Zach Noyle, he had a really cool water shot. I think you use Access Go too, right?
Yeah, I started using one.
Yeah, it's for people who don't know, it's a really, really nice water housing for people to shoot in the water. Has like a dome port on some. It's got a pistol grip. It's really, really cool setup. And he had an actual front page picture published on like Surfer or something of in Hawaii, and it was a beautiful shot, and it was taken with his phone. It's crazy. Yeah,
so I think photographers are seeing the what you can do with them, and yes, the fact that you're getting multiple lenses on these cameras now. What I wonder is, what's it going to be like 20 years from now, 50 years from now? The quality of those lenses is only it's going to be exponential, the increase in all of the capabilities of these phones on the cameras that are on them.
Well, and I think having a camera and a phone that's so good also pushes the camera manufacturers, whether it's Sony, Canon, or Nikon, whoever it is, to make a better camera, so they put more stuff into it because they still want to be the leader in the photography world. So if you look at the cameras that are coming out now or coming out next year or whatever, the amount of stuff that is put into it is absurd.
It is
8K video, 50 megapixels, 15 to 20 frames per second, all in one camera, no heating. I mean, it's absurd. But I think
what I have learned though is that the camera can be great, but if you have a good piece of glass, that makes all the difference.
It makes it, and that is something I've definitely. I'll keep my camera body for a while, but I really have invested in proper glass because that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I've noticed in these new lenses that Sony has, these G Master lenses.
Unreal.
Man, they're incredible. I'm just using mine. I have a newer one, and I just use it on my little crop sensor Sony. So it's super light.
Yeah,
it's easy to pull out. If I'm on the paddle board to get a shot. And man, the quality is just incredible with those new lenses.
It's crazy. They are really heavy though. They're probably heavier than the crop sensor camera there, but they're amazing lenses. I love them.
And if you get the right one, they're much better than a camera. But I bet in a few years, cameras they're going to get closer. I mean, the phone cameras will get better and better.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's always something when they release a new phone. That's one of the biggest things they talk about is the camera and how new the camera is and what it can do now. And I think that's just going to get better and better. Mm-hmm. And it'll be really cool to see. Like, it'd be awesome to see because I know there are third-party companies that make like lenses you can attach on. I mean, I'm sure that at some point Apple might make their own extra lens attachments that would be proprietary and that would work perfectly.
Yeah, and we'll see what Apple does with I think even the technology like this night mode is really interesting because it's more than just shooting the picture. It's using software to basically create the picture.
Right.
And we're just kind of right now on the cusp of that. I think you're going to see all these new ideas as far as photography is concerned about what software will end up doing with it. In other words, when the image is taken, it's creating some kind of effect or whatever we can't even imagine.
Yeah. It's an exciting time for cameras. The past year and a half or two, I mean, they've really, from the camera companies and the phone, they've really just pushed out a lot of cool stuff.
They have,
and it'll be cool to see what else they can bring out, and then the doors that will open.
Yes,
like through the new technology. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited.
Me too.
Well, thank you so much, Tom, for coming out. And if you want to say the name of your book and where you could get it.
Yeah, sure. So the name of the book is called Sacred Waters. It comes in 3 versions. There's an ebook version for an iPad, an ebook version for an iPhone, and the softcover edition is just, I approved all the proofs a couple of weeks ago at the printer, and that one will be available in a couple of weeks. If you want to buy or purchase any of those versions, you can go to my website, which is www.tomschifanella.com, and it's SCHIFANELLA. You can also go to my Instagram page. There's links there that will take you to the store forum that's on my website, and my Instagram page is at tom.in.abf.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for coming out. Thank you.
I appreciate the time, and it was a wonderful conversation. Yes. I think I learned something about you, and it was very stimulating.
Thank you. Yeah, this was awesome.